everybody. Welcome to Talks at Google. My name is Ben Collins-Sussman. I'm an engineering director here in the Google Chicago office. I'm also one of the local site leads, which means I get to represent our office at various things around the city, but it also means I get amazing opportunities to talk to visitors when they come by, and I'm really excited. Today we have a special guest, the well-known mathematician, Dr. Eugenia Cheng, who's just published this new book. Yay, Is Math Real? How simple questions lead us to mathematics' deepest truths. So we're going to talk. We're going to have a conversation for a little while. But I want to remind folks, if you're in the audience or if you're streaming, we have a Q&A. We have a Dory page. Please go there and add questions, because we do not have live microphones in here. So add your questions to the Dory, and we'll do some Q&A at the end. But before we get started, let me do a quick introduction. So originally from the UK, Dr. Cheng is now a Chicago local, like me and others. Yay, Chicago. Yay. She is a scientist in residence at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and honorary visiting fellow at City University of London. She's written a bunch of books, such as How to Bake Pie, Beyond Infinity, and now this latest book is Math Real. As a mathematician, she researches category theory. As a musician, she's a classical pianist who organizes collaborative salons, I'm told. As a teacher, she has dedicated her career to improving math education through teaching, videos, public talks, books, etc. So thank you. Welcome to Google. I'm excited to have you here. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks. It was great to have you. I'm going to start with a really burning question. Well, first, this job interview is only going to take an hour. It'll be fine. Just
and
be relaxed.
A trick question, right?
Yes, I've got the clipboard. Really important question. I was looking online and I saw there were two versions of the book. Is math real? Is maths real?
Yes.
Did somebody do a global search and replace on the word maths?
So here's the thing. I am a mathematician, so I write using LaTeX, which some of you may be familiar with. So I just have a macro that switches all my spellings between the UK and the US spellings, depending on what I'm doing.
I love it.
But I didn't typeset this book. I did typeset the first book, but I am a control freak about typesetting. But it doesn't go so well when they want to convert it to an ebook, so somebody else did it, and I don't know who did it or how they did it.
I love it.
But when I do it, I just have a macro.
Fantastic. Yes, I'm a big LaTeX fan too. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about the book, some of the subjects in there. So you've got this idea in the book in the beginning talking about what you call a mathematical urge, right? It's sort of a motivational force. You have a lot of metaphors, like it's an open cupboard, it's a mountain in the distance, and then my favorite is it's like children jumping in a puddle. So can you talk a little bit about this? How does this happen? Have you always felt this way?
I think I have always felt this way. I'm basically, I've said somewhere else, I think, I'm like one of those toddlers who just keeps asking why all the time and is never really satisfied with the answer. And it's true that sometimes when toddlers doing that, they're just trying to put off bedtime or avoid putting their coat on or something. And maybe I'm doing that too, but I'm always trying to put off more things by being curious and wanting to know more. And I've never been satisfied with an answer that required me to believe somebody else. I don't like believing other people. I want to be able to understand it myself. And that urge, it's like wanting to be able to make things yourself. I'm like that in the kitchen as well. I want to be able to cook things myself. I want to make things myself, and I want to understand things myself. And if there's something that I don't understand, I want to try and understand it. And that's the urge. It's like if you see a puddle, some people want to jump in it and some people don't. And if you see something like, some people feel the urge to climb a mountain, an actual mountain. I don't feel that urge. Or if you're on the edge of a cliff, some people will feel the urge to look over the edge of a cliff. I don't feel that urge either. But if it's a mathematical cliff, I do feel the urge. And I think that there's one of the things that is different about people who don't in mathematics and people who don't isn't whether you understand it or not. I don't understand anything. It's how you feel about whether you understand it or not. And it's about feeling the urge to go towards the things you don't understand rather than backing away from them. And that's what I am referring to as that urge.
There's a couple things in there that caught my attention where, first of all, I think a lot of us are are used to sort of poo-pooing children who ask why all the time. Oh, that's not a real question. Just ignore that. But you actually value that, right? When a small child says why, that's a sincere question.
I
right?
love talking to small children and answering all of their why questions wherever they go. And if it gets to a point where I don't know how to answer, isn't that wonderful? I think it's fantastic that small children can ask questions that we adults cannot answer. And that happens in math a lot as well. And it's one of the reasons that math is difficult to teach, because it's so easy to ask a deep question that is really hard to answer. And the trouble is that if adults or teachers feel that that makes them look stupid, then they're not going to encourage those questions. But we should turn that around, and instead of feeling stupid, we should celebrate the curiosity and the instincts of the person asking the question.
So on the same topic of children, then, there really is, I guess, there's an aspect of play here, right? Like, I think so many people think of mathematics as this very intense, laborious, serious chore, right? But what I see in this book and the way you're talking about it is, it's really a form of playfulness, right? Like in a puddle. Yeah.
Yes, and that is how we make progress. We play around with things. We don't know what we're doing in advance, but we play around in order to figure things out. And it makes me really sad that math in school is typically quite playful at the start. When you're 5, and when you're 6, you play around with stuff. You're given blocks and what they call manipulatives to play with, and then you make pictures, and then suddenly it's like, okay, now add these numbers up and get the right answer. Oh no, you got the wrong answer. You got the right answer. Oh, you're good at math, you're terrible at it. And then you have to get all the way through your entire education, and you don't get to play with math again until you start grad school. And in this country, not even then, not until you've done 2 years of qualifying exams at grad school, like 3 years of grad school before you get to play with math again. And so you have to do all the rigid parts to be allowed to play. Imagine if sport was taught like that. Oh, well, we're just going to teach you all the theory of baseball, but you're not going to actually play anything. And I just picked a random American sport, but I don't know.
Or just exercises, right? Just kick this ball in a circle forever.
Well, no, you never do that. You just write essays about playing, analyze other people's games in essays until you get to grad school, and now you can try actually playing.
Okay, well, we're on the topic of the educational system here, so I'm curious. You asked this really important question about what makes math good, right? And there are a lot of lenses you could answer that with, right? Value lenses.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of those lenses?
I mean, there are many ways to value everything, right? And I think that unfortunately, math gets pushed too much for its usefulness, where useful is meant in a very utilitarian way. And then in order to, first, that two things happen. One is it makes it sound really boring. It's like saying, oh, I'd like you to meet this friend of mine. They're really useful. This is not interesting. And it's like telling children that broccoli is good for you. That if you have to say that something is good for you, then it's kind of like saying it's not going to be tasty or fun. So the only reason we're doing it is because it's good for us. But I do think it's useful, but with a broader sense of useful that is beyond the utilitarian, because it's not just this specific thing we're doing is going to specifically help us solve an actual thing in our lives. And it's more that this way of thinking is we're training our brains to think well, and that learning how to use our brains well is always going to help us in every aspect of our life. And the trouble is that if you present it as useful more specifically, then it just isn't. And children very quickly realize that it isn't. And the supposed real life homework questions that I love it when my friends send me their children's stupid homework questions. Like, you have 87 wild horses and 16 of them escape. How many wild horses do you have left? Oh, yes, let me think about my wild horse real life situations. Or I think my favorite one, which I mentioned in another book, which someone really had as their homework in elementary school. It's like, you have 1 meter of string. You use 30% of it to tie up Joe. And then you use 35 centimeters of it to tie up Eddie. How much do you have left to tie up Sally? And first of all, why are we tying people up? And 30 centimeters of string is really not very much string to tie something with anyway. So that was a really great example of pushing something for some reason that's clearly not the reason that is then not fulfilled by how it's being taught. And it opens up the floor for people to go, oh, well, I learned all this. When am I ever going to use trigonometry? I've never used trigonometry in my daily life. And actually, until last week, when I did use some trigonometry in my daily life for the first time, I had never used trigonometry in my daily life. It is true.
Wait, how did you use trigonometry?
Well, I wanted to measure the angle of, actually, I think this is my Wall Street Journal column this week. I wanted to measure the angle I have my keyboard, because I have a treadmill desk and I have my keyboard at quite a steep negative angle, and I had it propped up on some books, and I wanted to buy a proper tray for it, a stand for it, and I wanted to measure the angle, but I don't own a protractor. And then I thought, aha, but I can measure the X distance and the Y distance and use arctan.
I was trying to measure the height of a tree. Yeah. I did the same. I had a protractor, and I got the distance to the tree and the angle, and I was like, there you go.
When I was a teenager, I had a protractor with me all the time. No. I thought about printing one from the internet and cutting it out, and then I thought, no, I can use trig.
Okay, but a lot of people criticize mathematics for being too out of touch, right, with reality, like something like braids or whatever, right? Like how it's so abstract, it's not useful. Why do we study it at all, right? That's a
so my point of view is always that the abstraction has a point, and that the abstraction is not just to float around in the clouds, although it's also fun. So I do find abstraction fun just for itself, but I think the point is so that we can study more things at the same time, because the point of abstraction is to forget some details about a situation so that more things become the same. And once more things have become the same, you can study them all at the same time, which is way more efficient than studying them individually one at a time. And the more abstract you become, the more things become the same. And so I like to say it's like using a flashlight, where if you hold it very close up, then it's very bright, but you only illuminate a very small area. And if you hold it further back, then the area that you illuminate becomes broader, even though it's a bit less bright. And so the abstract version is more about seeing overviews and contexts and connections between different things. Then it's important to be able to zoom in again and be specific when you want to study those details. But the key is to be able to do both, I think.
There is a danger to too much abstraction, right? I
think I've heard you get stuck there. If you get stuck there, then there is a danger.
How do you know when to stop abstracting?
That's a very good, that's part of the process of learning. And it's true that if you become too abstract, then everything becomes the same. And I think this is true when we talk about people, for example. At some level, we're all the same, right? We're all people. And this is a wonderful, we're all just the same, we're all people. But if we do that too much, then we start forgetting about the different struggles that different people have faced. And so if we say, we're all the same, that's great, but then that's like saying we should be color blind, race blind, for example, which is bad because people have been treated differently for real up till now in the world, and we need to be able to see that and recognize those differences so that we can correct for them, even though at some other level, we're all the same.
I agree. I think there's another aspect to when you talk about valuing math. I think you said it was building mental muscle, right? That it's just almost just sort of strengthening the brain, right, for reasoning. At the core,
right? And so I love talking about this because one of the reasons I have great sympathy and empathy for people who had bad math experiences when they were young is I had terrible sport experiences when I was young. I hated it. I was told I was bad at it. No one helped me get better. People made me feel stupid. They made fun of me. And I think this has happened for a lot of people in math. But also, I rejected the idea of fitness as anything that was important. But that was my response to being made to feel bad for it. And so people do that with math as well. If someone tells you you're really bad at something, one thing you can do is go, well, it's a stupid thing to even want to do anyway. What's the use of doing that? And so, but then I realized that being fit is not just about being able to run for the bus, because I think that's like saying we need math because it's useful in our daily lives. I don't think that being fit is about being able to run for the bus. First of all, it can be fun. It turns out that physical exertion can be fun, but I didn't discover this for years after I left school. And so I think that mental exertion can also be fun, and some people don't realize that because they've been so put off. And also that having a strong core is a really important starting point for just being able to use your body better. And this is not necessarily about being able to run for the bus, but as one gets older, which one does, it's about not injuring yourself and about not having pain when you're just sitting at a computer for a long time. Or I play the piano, and I like the fact that I can play for hours without hurting myself, and that involves using my body well, just generally. And that having a strong core, there's no specific activity in daily life that only uses your core, but it enables you to make better use of all the rest of your muscles. And I think math is that for the brain, that it's a core that even if you're not specifically doing that exact problem in your daily life, having that strong core inside your brain enables you to better access all the rest of your brain power.
Now, you're preaching to the choir here, right? I mean, and I
you know, there's something funny about that saying. In the UK, we don't say preaching to the choir because the choir doesn't believe in anything. They just go to earn money because they're paid.
Wow.
In the UK, we say preaching to the converted, not
yes.
preaching to the choir.
That is more accurate.
Yeah.
I like it. We've both been at University of Chicago, and I find, there are headwinds in this argument. I've made this argument myself about strengthening the core. My alma mater is the University of Chicago. I know you've taught there. They always, when I was there, we used to talk about, it's not about what the specifics of what you're learning. We're teaching you how to think. We're teaching you to be a good thinker. And I find that's difficult to sell these days, especially when I go and speak to students, just because the cost of education is so high. I feel like it's almost become transactional. Like you pay a tremendous amount of money, therefore I must come away with very specific skills to repay that money, to get a high-paying job. And they don't want to hear about strengthening the core, right?
It's interesting though, because let me just think about this for a second, because
it's a hard problem.
It's going to be recorded and go online.
I'm sorry.
Okay, no, I'll say it anyway. I think it's okay.
Oh, no.
I found it harder to convince students of that at the University of Chicago when I was teaching honors calculus than I do at the School of the Art Institute.
Interesting.
Because my art students, they love thinking. I don't think they're there being transactional, and they're not thinking about going to get a high-paying job. They're in art school.
Checks out.
They just want to think about things, and they want to think well and think better, and they're not.
Awesome.
Whereas at the University of Chicago, like you say, they were paying tons of money, or someone was paying tons of money for them, and they wanted A's so that they could get into the next level. Like they wanted to get into honors thingy and then get a great job, so they needed all the A's.
Pay back their loans. Yeah.
Right, but we don't have grades at the School of the Art Institute.
I didn't realize
There's no grades.
Wow.
And so, well, first of all, isn't that great?
That is great.
That's it, really. There was no second of all to that.
Wow. Well, let me change subjects for a moment here. Move to. You talk a lot about the process of mathematics in your book, right? You talk about there's shapes and patterns and ideas and letting things in, and then you talk about how sometimes you want to break things down into elemental parts. What's with the fewest number of parts you can have if you're trying to build a world, and then what's the process of building up the world? Can you talk a little bit about that iteration and how you? Is it better to start with pieces? Is it better to deduce them? How do you think about this?
It's many things. I don't like always putting things into competition with each other, and so it's not that one way is better than the other. I always try and say what is good about doing this way and what is good about doing this way, and find the way that's most helpful for the thing you're trying to do right now. And so sometimes there's something complicated you're trying to understand, and so we need to break it down into basic building blocks in order to understand how it's built up. And then sometimes we start with some basic building blocks and go, what can we build with this? And then the best thing, my favorite thing is when those two methods meet, when they give the same answer. And so it's like, if you're going to visit a foreign city that you've never been to, people do this in two ways, right? Some people make a whole itinerary, look up all the things they want to visit and then find them all. And other people, I'm more likely to just plonk myself in the middle and wander around a bit. And the great thing is if you plonk yourself in the middle, wander around and stumble upon all of the things that you wanted to. So then the two things have met up. And when I first visited Chicago, which was in 2003, I I was too used to European cities. And so I plonked myself in the middle and wandered around and nothing really happened. It really worked.
But I see, top down, bottom up. You can do them at the same time.
Right, and
right?
so
you really
you're
can,
trying to do both. And I think it's like that with understanding our own personal beliefs and the personal beliefs of others, because you can start with knowing something you believe, but then I think that being a helpfully logical member of society involves trying to understand where your own beliefs come from back to some really fundamental starting points so that you know what your core beliefs are. But then the other thing is, if you're not sure what you think about something, you can start from your core beliefs and then figure out what you think about it based on your fundamental principles. And sometimes if we have a really big disagreement with someone, say about politics, then sometimes it turns out our core beliefs aren't that different. It's just that our sort of manifestation of them somewhere along the way it went different. Sometimes it turns out our core beliefs are so different that we might as well not even try and have a conversation yet, because so it's good to be able to understand where those differences came from. And that, I feel that that's a mathematical discipline, the ability to unpack somebody else's argument from their point of view, not from our point of view. It's really tempting to go, oh, they're just being irrational. But they're not. They're just starting from a different belief system.
Different set of axioms, and therefore different theorems.
Possibly
right?
also different type of logic, but...
You touched on something in there that reminded me of, in the book, you talk about this tension in the process between things you can reason about and things you have an intuition about, right? And how they play off each other. But they are sometimes at odds too, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
That's the most interesting time, because for me, the point of reasoning is to build up really, really careful arguments. And that if it always agreed with our intuition, then there'd be no point doing it. We could just use our intuition. But the point about our intuition is to invoke aspects of our human brain and our feelings and things we haven't brought into our consciousness yet, things that we've just absorbed over the course of our life that happen at some other level than rational thinking. And I don't think the answer is to just kill our intuition because our rational reasoning is saying something different. I think the answer is to really understand why there's a difference. And then sometimes you can really learn a lot in figuring out where that difference is. And then you can either realize that there was something in your reasoning that was missing a piece, or you can actually change your intuition as it goes along. When I was moving back to Chicago, so I was here as a postdoc, and then I took a permanent job in the UK, was miserable, and then was wondering whether to come back. And I got offered a 1-year temporary teaching position at the University of Chicago. And oddly, despite the fact that I was desperate to get out of my job, I was really, really unsure about whether to take this job, and I couldn't figure out why I was nervous about it, despite the fact that I was completely miserable. And so I made this weighted pros and cons list. And what I realized was that if I just counted the pros and cons, there were way more cons than pros. It's just that there was one pro and it was like infinity. And so then I realized I clearly needed to come back. But doing that helped me understand why there were these two opposing feelings. There was the feeling that I really definitely needed to get out. But then when I rationalized it, there was this huge long list of cons, but they were all really tiny. And so then I found out where the disconnect was, and then it sorted the whole thing out just like that.
So this comes actually, you're touching on this tool of illustration, right? Of drawing as a way of maybe connecting reason and intuition, right? You do a lot of drawings in the book, which I love. And we were talking about whiteboards beforehand. Something that I think what I love in the book is the way you talk about how illustration sort of leads to enlightenment by pointing out certain things you didn't notice, right? That maybe touch on your reason or touch on your intuition. But again, I'm also curious about the dangers here, right? You talk a little bit about illustrations being abused, right? Can you talk a little bit about...
Right. So whenever we get to invoke people's intuition, it can, everything can be manipulated. Everything. Which is why education is important, so that we can all protect ourselves and our loved ones from that kind of manipulation. But invoking the visual intuition can be really helpful, but it can also go wrong, like when people draw graphs and it turns out that their scale has started at 1 million or something.
Right.
That the scale is going from 1 million to 1 million and 2. And then they're like, oh, there's been this huge increase, and it's going from 1 million to 1 million and 2. And so things like that, where a graph can fundamentally really help us. If it's just a list of numbers, it's very hard to see what the shape of it is. But then when you draw a graph, then you can see the shape. And so I love the use of diagrams in mathematics. And my field of research, category theory, it depends very heavily on diagrammatic reasoning. But first you have to prove that the diagrams correctly match up with the logic. And then you can use the diagrams. Because if they don't correctly match up with the logic, then you can make an argument using diagrams and feel like it's right, but it's not actually corresponding to what's going on.
So the diagrams become a tool themselves.
Yeah,
That's
it becomes
amazing.
an actual form of reasoning.
Wow, that's fantastic. I'm thinking about before we were talking about my teenager, how he refuses. He's 15. He refuses to believe in imaginary numbers, right? And I know in your book, you talk about the evolution. Like, how do we start with whole numbers, and then integers, and then rationals, and irrationals? And I was talking at the dinner table with my son about these programming. He's with me with rationals. He's totally. I get to irrationals. He's like, "Yep, I totally get it." The circle, circumference, diameter. That's a real thing. Irrational number. Cool. Pi is real. And then he hasn't learned about imaginary numbers yet, so he's very angry. It says that's not real. It's something silly things people make up.
Is he just being angry with you?
He could just be 15. Yes,
right.
It could just be a symptom of being 15.
Yeah,
yes.
right. So you could just say, so actually, no, they're not real.
They're not real. Yeah. They're imaginary.
Yeah.
That's so clever.
Yeah.
But I think the problem is he can't connect his intuition to an imaginary number. It doesn't correspond to him, in his mind, to anything you can see, like a circle, right? Even if you put them on a Cartesian plane, he still feels it's disconnected from reality, right? So I'm curious, how would I talk about this? Or what would you say to your students? Or maybe they have said this to you.
I think it's really important to validate everyone's feelings about things. And so if someone said that they didn't believe in imaginary numbers, I'd say that's completely fair and valid. They're kind of dumb. We just made them up. We don't even know if they exist. We don't know what they are. But the really cool thing is that we can make stuff up, because that's what our brains do. We make things up all the time. People write books. Fiction. I made up this whole book. People write fiction, right? They make up characters. And does it matter? And this is spoiler alert. This is what I end up saying at the end about whether math is real or not. That in the end, does it matter? That's not the point. The point isn't whether it's real or not. The point is whether it helps us, I think. And it is true that. Also, is it fun? So that's the other thing. I think imaginary numbers are fun. I think they're hilarious. And I love...
Hilarious?
Because you can't tell which one is which out of I and negative I. So I'm assuming I'm talking to an audience of to preach
nerds.
The choir.
Yes,
the choir. So I is the square root of -1, right? But there's a positive one and a negative one, because whichever one is which, right? But you can't tell which one is which. So how can you tell which one is I and which one is negative I? Well, you can't. And that's cool. That's why things like the complex solutions to quadratic equations come in conjugate pairs, because you can't tell which one is which. So every time that something is true of an I, it's got to be true of the negative I, because we can't. It's like a quantum thing. That once you've decided which one is I, then the other one's negative I. But how can you even decide which one is which? Because you can't tell them apart. It's extraordinary. And that I feel like we don't make enough of the fact that it's completely bizarre. It's like so bizarre. And then why is it useful? Why is it useful in physics? It has no right to be useful in physics. We just made it up. It's ridiculous.
But it works.
It does
is
work.
useful.
Why
it is actually useful, right?
Right. So,
I love that you talk about feelings, right? Like the idea that we're allowed to have feelings about math, right? A lot of people are like, what are you talking about? It's math. It's true or it's false. It's not about feeling, right? And yet you encourage your students to have feelings.
And they're so baffled by that sometimes. When I say, sometimes I just put in homework questions. How do you feel about this? And when I first do it, they're like, and sometimes they go, I don't know. And I'm like, that's the correct answer. As long as you were being honest about it, then that is the correct.
Does anybody say, I feel a sense of awe and wonder at the universe? No? I never say that?
Well,
okay.
It just makes me sad that they're so unused to the idea of being allowed to have feelings. And honestly, in anything that we ever teach to anybody, if we don't let people have feelings, or just in life, if we don't let people have feelings, well, first of all, they're going to have them anyway. Then we're just going to cut off our communication with them if we don't let them feel them in front of us. And so I can't stop having feelings, that's it. I feel a lot of feelings and I can't hide them very easily. And sometimes that is off-putting to people. But you know what? That's just how I am. And I'm too old to change that now, I think. And so I encourage my students, and once they get used to the idea that it's okay for them to have feelings, I think it can be really liberating. Sometimes our classes do feel a bit like group therapy.
I mean, you're world building together, right? It is an inherently creative, collaborative activity, right? And every time I think of all the other creative, collaborative activities out there, maybe you're playing music together or writing a story, like, it involves feelings, right? It involves, like, these aren't robotic, right?
But also
activities.
Just to learn things, if you don't feel things while you're learning them, it's just not going to go in very deep. Is it? You remember things much longer if you feel something. Otherwise, what is even the point?
Yes. How, we're doing okay on time. Maybe we switch to rant mode for a moment. So how...
Say rant.
Rant mode.
I'm always in rant mode.
You're ready to rant. No, you're very positive. But we'll switch. Tell us more. How is our math educational system broken?
Oh,
how did this happen? And how do we fix it? I feel like you have thoughts about this.
No, I have no opinions.
No opinions.
All
right,
next question. Yeah, right.
That's a D. Okay.
The whole thing makes me really sad, and it's to do with math being taught in a way that is so rigid. And the trouble is, one of the many troubles, I think, is that people who are in positions to make decisions about stuff have either been successful in that system and so want to continue to value it, or have not been, and there's no kind of there's nothing except whether you've been successful in it or not. And I think also some people are making loads of money. When I first got here, and I said to another professor who'd come from Europe, why is everyone obsessed with calculus in this country? It's not like that in any other country.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We're not obsessed with calculus in Europe at all. And he said to me, I think he was from Hungary, he said, in this country, always follow the money. And I was like, the textbook companies, they're making so much money from, is that what it is?
Just calculus textbooks? Is it big calculus?
Yeah,
I don't understand. What are they doing?
I saw, there was someone who wrote one of the famous calculus textbooks who died, and his house went on, and his house was this extraordinary, it was like this $20 million house built by, it was from calculus textbooks. I should write a calculus textbook.
But why calculus? Why not statistics or analysis?
I know. Well, I think it's an ongoing process.
Okay.
People who are successful in that system, they get so much of their self-esteem from the fact that they were able to do calculus, and so they can't admit that it might not be worthwhile, because then where would their self-esteem go? And so, unfortunately, math is so much used as a filter, and so the people who get their self-esteem from being able to do something that somebody else can't do want to keep using it to filter people out, to keep their self-esteem intact. Whereas there are some others of us who are vocational educators who get our self-esteem from being able to explain things to people who couldn't previously do them. And so for us, we get our self-esteem from being able to bring people in. And that is absolutely antithetical to the people who get their self-esteem from keeping people out. And unfortunately, I think there are more of those people who are still making education policy. And so much of education is about putting people in a hierarchy rather than about teaching people things. And one of the things I love about teaching at art school is we're not trying to put people in a hierarchy at all. And so I can spend almost all of my teaching time just explaining math to people, not judging them on it. And I wish that education could move more towards teaching people things rather than judging them for things. And that, really about, I would say, is the fundamental issue.
It's about inclusion rather than gatekeeping, right? But
yes.
You're not just seeing this in mathematics, you're seeing it other realms as well.
Everything,
Yeah.
and somehow math is used as a particular filter for. And there's part of me that thinks it's kind of hilarious that math has this reputation of being the really difficult thing. And so when people say to me, "Oh wow, you're a mathematician, you must be really clever," I am, very clever. but it's not just because I'm a mathematician. And I think that it's funny that it's held in this mysteriously high esteem, and the reason it's held in that is because it's presented so black and white that there are these right answers and wrong answers, and then if you can get the right answer, it's considered to be something mysterious. And
you're
so
superior.
It's
Yes.
superior, and people still think that it's something that you have to be born with, which is one of the most terrible destructive. I was thinking, is destructive too strong a word? No, maybe it's not too strong a word. The idea that you have to be born with a gift to be able to do it is very destructive, because first of all, it means some people give up because they think they're not good enough, and secondly, it removes the responsibility of educators to try and do better, because you can just say, oh, well, this person wasn't born to do it, rather than saying, oh wait, it's not about being born with a gift, it's how much you were helped by the people around you, and that therefore if this person isn't doing well, it's not because they didn't have the DNA, it's because we didn't help them enough. And
I see that with
take that responsibility.
I see that with music and art as well, right? Oh, you can't draw unless you're born with a gift. Like, no, that's not true, right? Same with doing music, right?
Right.
Lots of gatekeeping in those other creative activities.
Yeah.
I am curious, though, the way you talk about gatekeeping in mathematics, you introduced this term called ethnomathematics in your book. Can you talk a little bit about how that's related?
It's very, very fraught, this discussion. But the general idea is that there is mathematics that is connected to culturally, to culture, rather than, I'm going to say the word culture over and over again,
culture,
as opposed to the mathematics that has been sort of constructed by academics in sort of lab type situations. And ethnomathematics is the kind that has developed culturally by, for example, native people who know how to build a really great kayak and go fishing, as opposed to people doing calculations on pieces of paper. And there are so many problems with calling it ethnomathematics, because one of the problems is like, well, that's not real mathematics, so we'll call it ethnomathematics. But then the other is, well, we're going to gracefully bestow on it we're going to acknowledge, oh yes, you're doing mathematics too, well done. And so there are all these problems. And then there are other problems, because it does sort of correspond to math done by people who aren't white, except that Chinese people don't count. And so Chinese math doesn't count as ethno-math because it's Chinese people. And so there are so many issues, not to mention the fact that through the whole history of mathematics up until about 300 years ago, all the great math foundations were developed by non-white people. It was by the ancient people from the Maya and Egyptians and Africans and Arabs and Indians, and it was all these ancient cultures, while white people were, I don't know what they were doing, living in caves.
But don't talk about those ancient cultures. We have real math now.
Right, exactly.
That's
so
European
that was
math.
then a bunch of European white male mathematicians were like, well, we need to define math properly, and then only when it fits our definitions of mathematics is it going to count as mathematics. Now everybody has to fulfill these definitions. And the thing is, I love those definitions. I think they're really great. And it has enabled math to progress amazingly. Writing rigorous proofs where your logic is absolutely sound right from the beginning means that you can build much greater complexity, and you can build and build and build. It's like the fact that if you learn to write, you can tell longer stories because you don't have to hold them in your brain. You can write a whole book rather than telling some kind of story. And if you write, I am also a Western classically trained musician, and it's the same thing. When you write down music with notation, you can develop huge pieces of music that you can't do if you're just doing it by ear. And if you build deep foundations, you can build taller buildings, right? But then you go, is it good that we build taller buildings? Is it good that we have developed all of this really complex mathematics? What have we done with it? We've made all these technological developments that are destroying the environment. Is it good? Do I feel guilty that I still really like the complex mathematics? Yes, I do. Do I sometimes feel guilty that I love Western classical music that's kind of tied up with imperialism. And yes, I do feel guilty, but I still like it. And so I don't know what the answers are. I just think we should think about it, because maybe the math that has been understood by indigenous people maybe that's better because they weren't destroying the environment. And we are. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
Let me follow up. Before we go to Q&A from the audience, have you or anyone you know ever thought about teaching math from some other cultural framework?
Yes, there are a lot of progressive educators who are doing that, and of course it's causing huge backlash from the exact quarters you would expect it to. Like, oh, woke math, and someone on, I will call it twitter.com said, well, if you call that math, then everyone's doing math. And I thought, yes, that's the whole point. You say that like it's a bad thing, and that's a classic gatekeep.
Failing to gatekeep. Yeah, yes. Yeah. Are there particular books about this that you could recommend? Or maybe afterwards, I'm curious.
Oh, now you put me on the spot.
No, it's okay. You don't have to remember, but I'm sure there are books.
Yes,
yeah. Okay,
there exist books.
Yes. Great.
You could Google it.
Google. I prefer Bing. I'm going to Bing that. Cool. So we have some questions that people have submitted. So let's start. Here's a question from the audience. So they want to know, what is your favorite mathematical concept that you explain to non-mathematicians? I don't know, maybe at a cocktail party or something? I don't.
I mean, it's probably my research field.
Do you walk around talking about math?
I do walk around. Well, yeah. And so my research is category theory, which someone I saw is carrying my book, The Joy of Abstraction, about category theory. But I love talking about category theory because I love telling people that it involves no numbers. And some people who aren't familiar with this kind of math, their eyes are like, how can you do math with no numbers?
Just relationships, right?
It's all about relationships, right? And it's all about characterizing things by how they relate to everything around them rather than by their intrinsic characteristics. And I love this because I think it gives us so many good moral lessons for life about how it shouldn't matter what a person's intrinsic characteristics are. What the only thing that matters is how they relate to the people around them, right? It shouldn't matter what they look like and what they're made or what their biology is. Who cares? What matters is how they relate to the people around them. And I also like to say this is my amazing excuse for being really bad at recognizing people's faces, because I remember how they relate to people. I don't remember their superficial intrinsic characteristics.
Do you talk about braids in social situations? Do you I mean, because that's one of your areas, right?
Yes, yeah, it is. But I do that more. I do that in public talks quite a lot.
Okay.
It's got good visuals, and unless I'm walking around with my hair in braids.
Okay, I love that part of the book. It was amazing. All these diagrams of ways to move things past each other related to hair braiding and other things. It's fantastic. Here is another question from the audience. What books, I guess across genre, have you found most influential in your life, particularly as it pertains to building bridges to close societal gaps?
Well, I love reading fiction, and some people are really surprised by this, and I'm still a bit surprised that they're surprised. But I don't. But
you work in fiction.
I'm surprised that they're surprised. But it makes me maybe a little sad that people think a mathematician wouldn't be interested in reading fiction. Like you say, it kind of is fiction. Mm-hmm. But it's about people, and people are so fascinating, and maybe the building bridges to close unnecessary societal gaps. I think probably the most important starting point is to just feel more empathy towards other people who are different, other people who have had different experiences, who have different points of view, probably because of their different experiences. And reading fiction, I find, is just really great for that. Because, you can read, I do read non-fiction, that feels a little bit more like work to me, but it doesn't feel like I can then just escape. And the thing about fiction, like abstract math, is that the author can craft a character to do exactly what they want, to make the message that they're trying to make. And this is how abstract math works as well, because we're not constrained by the physical world. If you're doing something that's describing the physical world, then you're constrained by what actually happens in the physical world. But when you're doing abstract math, you just make it up. And so you're only constrained by the size of your imagination. And I think this isn't talked about enough, that abstract math is all about what you can imagine. And if I have a huge imagination, I can imagine anything, basically. And that's what fiction is about to me. It's about imagining things, and although the people involved aren't real, as it were, they are representing something, and that abstraction, I think, means that it is more, it can connect with more people because it's an abstract situation that a good author has chosen to connect with a lot of people.
So I see the parallel, right? In some sense, you're talking about how can I construct a world where this is true? What in some cases it might be what mathematical things do I need, or in the case of a book, what characters or stories do I need? And either way, you're creating an abstraction that describes relationships, right? In both cases.
Yeah.
I love that. Another question from the audience. How should I introduce my children to mathematical topics? I have a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics. I would love to share love of math with them. I have 5, 3, and an 8-month-old. 5-year-old, 3-year-old, 8-month-old.
Well, since you ask, I have written 2 children's books.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
One of them is for younger children.
Okay.
Called Bake Infinite Pie with X plus Y. It kind of ties together a whole load of my adult book titles. And that's like a picture book. I mean, it is so much like a picture book. It actually is a picture book. But it has words in it as well. And it's probably for 3 to 7-year-olds, maybe. And then there's another one called Molly and the Mathematical Mysteries. In England, it's called Molly and the Mathematical Mystery. Somehow it became plural.
What?
Yeah, I know.
More LaTeX macros?
Somebody else did that. But that one I would say is for, it has flaps. It's got paper engineering, and so you put things up and put things together, and it's got absolutely spectacular illustrations by Alexandra Artemovska. And I would say it's for any child who's careful enough to be able to open a flap carefully, up to infinity years old, because I find all the things in that book just fascinating concepts. And it's about introducing the mathematical world as just a place to explore, not a place that has the right answers, but just weird and wonderful creatures and stuff. And I think that is, I wrote it because that's what I would want to introduce to children. My mother talked a lot of math with me when I was young. She is mathematical, but it wasn't like, now we're going to sit down and do our times tables. It was more just things in the world around us, and also explaining logic to me. She was really keen on making sure that we understood things like necessary and sufficient conditions and converses, and making sure. And she was always, because she was always accusing my father of using bad logic, which he does, because he's very intuitive. And so my mother would sit us down and go, well, that's a necessary condition, not a sufficient one. But she taught me how to program in BASIC when I was about 4. And I was really good at it for a 4-year-old. I don't think I ever got any better than that. So I still program like a 4-year-old. We did family, the funniest, gosh, this is going online, isn't it? Can I say this? Yeah, I think I probably can. We had this family project to program roulette. And so she taught us about probabilities, and she taught us how to program the computer to generate the random numbers and then calculate all the winnings depending on how much we put on. And then with my father, we made the roulette board. So we got a piece of wood, and so it was this family project. And then we played roulette as a family using the computer program. It was great. We did not use real money.
It's great. It's build intuition for statistics and other things, right? Yeah.
To learn that gambling's really bad because you always lose, and that the house always wins.
Let me, can you scroll one more question here for me? Because I think we've heard about it. Interesting. Here's an interesting question from the audience. What's a good way to build a mental map of all the different areas of math and problems that are useful for solving? I keep bumping into problems where there's a robust body of prior art that's applicable to problems I'm working on, but it feels accidental. Is there a better way? Interesting.
Wow, that's really deep.
That's a very deep question.
I think the thing is that
right here.
that things connect. Everything is connected in math. And one of the problems with the education system as it is that it tries to claim that there is a clearly defined linear path that you have to take through it. And that's just not true. And in fact, my field of research, category theory, could be seen as the thing that connects everything together, but other people see it in different ways. And so the traditional view was you had to learn all these other areas of math before you could possibly do category theory, because that's the connection goes that way. But it's not technically true. You don't actually need to know any math to do category theory. You have to feel like doing some formal, rigorous abstraction, but you don't need to know trigonometry to do category theory. You don't need to know calculus. It's like the fact that you don't actually need to know trigonometry to do calculus. You don't need to know anything to do calculus, really. That it's just put in some order because someone decided it. And so the thing is, I think the mental map is really that everything is connected to everything. And so if you imagine a kind of diagram of points where everything is connected to every other point, it's just a huge star. And then because then you can pick your own, it's like a choose your own adventure. Everybody can then take any path through it because everything is connected to everything else. And everybody's path may be different. And for me, it just so happens that doing the most abstract thing and then filtering down from that is a good way for me to do it. And everyone is different. I remember helping this 6-year-old at school. It was wonderful. They said that she needed help with math because they said she was no good at it. And that's one of the problems, right? You label people as no good. So I sat down to help her. And what turned out to be true, they gave her this extra book to help her. But it was a book that went through here's 3 cookies and 6 cookies and and it was all about cookies and apples and real things before going to just the sums with the numbers. Turns out she was fine with the numbers. She didn't like applying it to cookies. And I thought, wow, you're an abstract mathematician. She needed to read that book backwards. And that was always my thing. And so I often go to research talks, even now, where they start with the examples and then give me the theory afterwards. And I have to just hold the examples in my head, wait until they've given me the theory, and then rapidly unpack the examples. So I want the talk to be backwards.
I have run into that many times, what I call top-down versus bottom-up learning. And often when I'm working with people, I try to figure out, is this a bottom-up or a top-down person? Because if you get that wrong, you won't be able to communicate, right? Like you have to figure it out. Fascinating. Let's do one more audience question because we're almost out of time. I like this question because it's creative.
The bottom one.
It's the bottom one, yeah. Can you share with us how you start writing as an author? What advice would you give to a new writer, someone just starting out?
Just start. The most I'm very good at this part, although it's hard, and that is to just turn off all judgment and just write words and do not judge them until later. I'm really good at just spewing words out, and I'm in that phase at the moment because I'm writing the first draft of my next book, and I set myself a word count every day that I'm going to hit, and I will not judge myself while I'm doing it. Of course I do, and the longer it goes on, the more I judge myself, but I have to turn it off. And so I sit there and going, oh, this is kind of rubbish. Oh, that's the whole point. I'm going to write I'm just going to write really bad things today. And so every time I draft something, I sit down and tell myself, I'm going to write it really badly. And we were talking before we started about how when COVID happened and we first went into lockdown, at SAIC, we got this really helpful email from the chair of faculty about online teaching. And she said, please do it badly. It was so helpful to just hear someone say that. She's like, this is an emergency. We're not supposed to be experts in this. You've all got more important things to do. Do it badly. And so I do this with my first drafts as well. I just sit there and go, I'm going to do it really badly. And then I'll edit it afterwards. And at least that gets me going. Now, I didn't know if this question was about how you literally start writing or how you get your writing out there. And if it was the latter, then when I first started doing this, I just stuck things on my webpage. I wrote things because I wanted to process them. The first thing I wrote and put on my webpage is still there. And it's still quite downloaded. It's called Why Lectures Are a Waste of Time. Because it was before I sat down to give my first lecture course, I thought I better sit down and think about what lectures are for. And I concluded that they are destined to be a waste of time. It's a little bit clickbaity as a title. I don't know, we had the term clickbait in 2000, did we? But anyway, it was a bit clickbaity, but I don't mean they're a complete, total and utter waste of time. I just meant that it is bound to waste at least some of at least somebody's time. And that's what I meant by that. And then I stuck it on my webpage and people started reading it. And then I wrote another one that was called How to Write a Proof. That was when I got to the University of Chicago and discovered that no one in the first year knew how to write a proof because no one had ever told them. And so I sat down and wrote things, and it's still there. It's really old because I wrote it when I first got there in 2004, but people are still downloading it. And when I travel and give public talks, people sometimes come up to me and go, "Oh, I read your thing called How to Write a Proof. It was really helpful." And so because there's just stuff up there, then I wrote something for an informal talk I gave. It was math and Lego, why math is really just Lego. And I stuck that. So I just started sticking things up there. And then I started making YouTube videos when YouTube first appeared, which shows how old I am, I guess. But I had always wanted to write a math book that had a DVD at the back. Like when you do language learning and they give you a tape and then you can listen to native speakers. So I wanted to make a DVD showing me actually doing the math. And in those days, it would have been so expensive to make a DVD. And then YouTube happened. So that's when I started making the Catsters videos, teaching people category theory. And then it just sort of snowballed from there.
I feel like you stumbled into the other secret of writing, which is clickbait marketing, right? One of my coworkers and I used to speak at computer conferences, and one of our early talks that we gave was called like how everybody can get along in a software project, and the conference organizer said, no, you should rename this. This is how to deal with poisonous people. And we're like, okay, and then like huge crowds showed up because it's clickbait, right? But amazing. I love this. Why lectures are terrible. We're out of time, so I want to thank you for coming. This is amazing. It's an honor to chat. Thank you to the audience for asking these questions.
Thanks.
I hope it was fun for everybody. Here's the book. I'm sure you can find it in many bookstores and online. This can buy it online too, right? I have the electronic version. That's what I read. Yeah. So please grab a copy, and let's give one more round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thanks everybody for watching the stream. This is Talks at Google, and we will see you at the next event.